So we're looking at Learning Outcome 4 for Unit 4 today, which is assessing learners in education and training. Learning Outcome 4 is to be able to evaluate your own assessment practice. So 4.1 is review the effectiveness of practice, taking account of the views of learners and others. And then 4.2, identify areas for improvement in own assessment practice. There. Before we start talking about evaluating your own assessment practice, I just want to show, especially the Gibbs one. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is because it actually a nice layout. It just shows you exactly what a good way of reflecting and evaluating your own work is. So Gibbs in 1988, he created something called the Gibbs reflective cycle, and this is, like I just said, helps you to your learning experiences. So it offers a framework for examining your experiences, and it's sort of like a cycle where it, one thing leads on to the other. And when I show you the image, you'll see what I mean.
Okay.
So his reflect allows you to structure your reflective writing around 6 stages, and they're focused on what it is, so the description, what your feelings were, you evaluating it, an analysis, creating an action plan. So first you start off with your description, go on to how you felt about what you were doing, evaluate what you did, and pros and cons, conclude it with a summary, and then create an action plan. Say, right, this goes so great, the students lacked focus, it was a noisy background, we weren't sitting comfortably, we had to sit on the floor because we didn't have enough chairs. What can I fix? And then you put into a place, go in a quieter place, make sure every student has a proper seat to sit on and that you can focus without noise. So simple things that you do on a daily basis. And then you've got the Donald Schoen's theory of reflective practice. Now, you don't physically have to talk about these. You can mention them, saying that I'm going to use Gibbs' reflective cycle, or I'm going to use Schoen's theory of reflective practice. But you don't physically have to write about what they are. You can just mention them if you want to, if you decide to use any of them.
Okay. Now,
David Schoen is the author of a book called The Reflective Practitioner, How Professionals Think in Action. And this was published in and then republished in 19. Now, what Schoen believes is that his reflective model, it presents the concept in action or on action. So what he's saying is that you're thinking about what's happening while you're actually doing it, thinking about something after you've done that action, so at the end of a lesson and so on. So reflection in action, just to read this bit here. As something happens, so you're considering the situation, you're deciding how to act, and you like an example I can think of is I was working with a TA at that time. We were both teaching assistants in the classroom, and we were meant to be using laptops. For the sake of it, none of the passwords for any of the children that 30 children, we were going around, the two of us, trying to type things in. They just wouldn't work, no matter what. We wanted to teach them how to use a keyboard. So the teaching assistant, fantastic lady, we can't physically do it on this computer here. So she pulled up up an image of and she, used her fingers, pressed things, and she did the lesson in a slightly. Still got taught the content of it, and it was effective. Yeah.
Your voice is missing in between.
Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can ring in.
Sure.
Could help it. Right. 61820.
Please enter your conference ID, followed by the pound or hash. You will now be placed into the conference. This call is being recorded.
Is that better, Geeta?
Yeah, it is better.
You've not got an echo, have you?
No, it's fine.
Okay. Brilliant. So I was saying, I'll just go back on here. The first point is about reflection in action. Is you're reflecting as something is physically happening. Like say something goes wrong in your class and you've got to think on your toes and, but I can't use this resource, I can't use this laptop, how can I fix it? Then you go around and you change the lesson. And then second point is reflection on action. This is you reflecting on something after it's happening. So you're saying, right, at that time my laptop didn't work, maybe I could have done this, or I should have, changed the lesson or done my maths activity first and then put this onto another day. You're thinking about what you could have done and you're considering the situation and maybe also what needs to be changed in the future, like checking that passwords work or that the laptops are charged and so on. So when you do this, just say which one you use. If you're using Gibbs or if you're using Sean, say I'm going to be doing my evaluation, my reflection according to Gibbs' reflective recycle or Sean's reflective practitioner model.
Okay.
Yeah. So onto the actual lesson content here. So 4.1 is review the effectiveness of own assessment practice, taking account of the views of learners and others. Now, I know you've done quite a few reviews of your own effectiveness over the past 3 or 4 units. Yeah, I think you did them on Unit 2 and Unit 3 as well.
Yeah.
This is slightly different. We can't cross-reference this because it's about your assess. Every time they ask you to assess yourself on a different thing. So this is about assessment now. So again, you're going to follow the same steps as you did. You're going to check your strengths and your weakness, but you can actually do this in paragraph form rather than doing a SWOT analysis or a SMART targets or anything. Now, here you're going to review your own performance regularly and make sure that you know what your strengths and weaknesses are. And you're going to, look at what your strengths are so you can use them effectively. And then you're going to look at your weaknesses so you can check, is there something that I need to change? How can I change it? Then you just talk about maybe if for any weaknesses that need developing. You could do CPD. You could get guidance from your colleagues. You could get feedback. Maybe you could be mentored or coached. So there's many possibilities that can happen. So to effectively review your own assessment practices, you should, and this is a few of the information that you can do, is gain information like feedback from your learners and from others like your colleagues and any other professionals that you're around. You can also, gain, and there's been times when I've had to gain feedback from my students. I remember a parent approaching me. I was actually doing a course for the parents and teaching them how phonics is taught and so that they could support their children. And this young lady's son was actually in my class, and she came up to me and she said that, I'm really liking what we're doing here, but my son in class, when he's doing the work, he gets it done within 10 minutes, and she was correct, he did, and he's just sitting there, and then the teachers just tell him, or the TAs just tell him, oh, okay, give me a couple of other sums, make me a sentence, make me a picture, and she said it doesn't challenge him enough. He comes home and he's bored and he's saying, I don't get enough work. So after that, I started making sure that whoever was taking the class, if it was myself or anyone else, actually had a few extra worksheets or activities that I'd actually printed out and not just like thought off the top of your head and say write on a whiteboard. So we started creating extra work for this child, and we found that there were a few other children that looked at him, saw that he was doing extra things, and they got on with their work quickly. We marked it and then we give them an extra sheet, and it kept him occupied and he didn't feel that he was getting bored or, restless or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So parental feedback is quite a good one also. So, for example, look at your successes and your shortcomings, and then look at the effectiveness of your practice. So look at it in terms of validity, reliability, accessibility, compatibility, how you're managing it, and how you're minimizing bias. So just to have a bit of what effective practices are, these are just methods or techniques that you use and you've proven to be useful, so that you've used them in different situations and different scenarios in your classroom with your students and interventions, and they've given you the desired outcome. So they're giving you the result that you were after. So that is what makes an effective practice. So anything that helps you achieve your goal is effective practice. If you've done it and you've realized I taught them in a particular way, we used an activity where we did role plays, but I realized that the kids just started messing around, or they were dancing, or they were just getting really rowdy. That is not effective practice. Next time if you do a role play, you need to control it better, or maybe not use that for that particular class. So, as I said, it's quite a simple one on here. On here, you just need to review how to answer this. You just need to review the effectiveness of your own practice. Look at what goes well for you. What do you actually think is good for you? How do you do certain things within your classroom environment or your group environment? And how does that go for you? Like, do you do a general, like a recap at the beginning of a lesson from what you learned the day before? Do you have a quick chit chat just to see how everybody's going? Make sure you've got all the resources. So what do you do? And then just talk about how you listen to your learners as well. So maybe you could talk about at the end of the lesson or throughout the lesson, you ask for feedback and say, how are you guys going? Is anybody needing any help? Or what did you think of today's session? Can you give me the smiley, the neutral, or the unhappy face on your work? So there's a few things you can talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because that's a bit of an introduction, the second step for this is just to carry out a reflective account. Explain what your assessment practices are. So you're doing assessments, well, you have been, you might have finished now, but you have been doing assessments throughout September. And just talk about what your practices were. You've touched upon it quite a lot throughout the work that you sent me already, but you just need to put it in like a summary. So what do you do? How do you get feedback? How do you adapt and differentiate your work? So your assessment is not just you physically doing like the diagnostic or initial assessments that you've done at the beginning of the year. It's about how you observe and how you just look at students' homework and see, right, this person is keeping up, these ones are struggling. Spelling tests, some of the children might be revising and practicing the sound that you've given them. Some of them might not be. They'll show within the work that they're producing. So what sort of things do you look at to get feedback from your assessments in here? And then finally, last paragraph, so you'll have about 3 paragraphs or maybe a lot more depending on how detailed you go. Just review how effective it is. So tell me, is it very effective, your assessment practices, or is there anything that you can improve? And if there are effective points in it, what are those effectiveness? What do you actually do? And what can you carry forward? Are you okay with 4.1, Geeta? Do you want to go over anything?
No, I'm fine. So as you are saying, review the effectiveness on assessment practice. Do I need to use, like earlier you discussed about Gibbs theory and Donald's theory, do I need to write anything about any of them here?
You don't need to physically, or I would highly recommend that you just say that I am going to be using, I have used Gibbs' reflective cycle when carrying out a review of my effectiveness. You don't need to physically write anything about them, but you just need to mention that you're using one of them.
Okay.
Yeah. And then when you do your review of it, you can just put down how you feel about it as well. that'll cover the first reflective cycle on here, what your feelings are.
Okay.
So 4.2 is to identify areas for improvement in your own assessment practice. And again, you've answered similar things to this in the previous unit. They have a nice uniformity that they keep. So for here, you've got to be able to identify any areas of improvement in your assessment practices. So not in your teaching, not in your delivering, just your assessment. So look at what strengths you have and what areas of improvement you have. Now, because assessment is something that we don't really think about, we do it unconsciously, or we just notice things without really realizing that we're assessing someone. We don't really put a name to it. But just think how, when you're in the classroom, how good are you observing someone? Because you've probably picked up on few students that you can see that are struggling. And you're not physically gone to look at their work, or you've just been across the classroom and you've seen that they're fidgeting, or they're just sitting there still, or they're not really taking part, and then you walk over and you might speak to them. So you do a lot of assessments on a daily basis in mini forms. So then you can put down that I'm really good at observing my students, or I'm good at having question and answer sessions, or a good conversation at the beginning of a class to assess my students' learning, or at the end of the class I'm good at getting feedback just by asking simple questions and seeing what my students thought about certain things. So on the next part here, you've got to consider these following points. So evaluate your assessment practices and then consider the outcomes of this. So you've looked at your assessment practices. You've said, right, I'm quite good at doing observations, but when it comes to question and answer sessions, I just finish the lesson and I don't plan enough time in to do a question and answer session. So that's an issue for me. So you could say the outcome of my observations is good because I'm noticing what my students are taking in by looking at them, but I could really improve this if I just had 5 minutes before the end of the session just to ask them question and answers and actually see how much they've taken in, how much, what they're actually taken away from the lesson, or is there something else that I need to go back and restudy again or revise with them. Identify what your own good performances are. Look at what performances aren't that great and what can be improved. And then plan the aims and methods of bringing about improvements. So just put down what can you do to fix any issues that might not be that great, that might need a bit of fixing. Say my question and answer sessions, they need work on so I can get feedback. How can I do this? How much time am I going to plan for this? If I'm running out of time and I feel like this is important, what can I cut out to make sure that this gets asked every day? So to answer 4.2, all you've got to do is, because you're identifying your areas for improvement in assessment, just put down a detailed summary of your findings, what you think you're good at and what you think you need to improve on. So you're identifying the areas you'd like to improve, what impact these improvements will have on your assessment practice. So if you do factor it in that I need to improve my question and answer session, what is the impact going to have when you start doing this? What will help you with this? And then what steps are you going to take to make these improvements happen? So are you going to start planning in 5 minutes extra for your lesson? Or are you going to make sure that you're factoring it in and reducing your chit-chat time at the beginning, or making sure that the activities are a little bit simpler or shorter? What can you do? So you're talking about what steps you're going to take to make these improvements and how you'll actually implement these improvements. And again, we've already talked about what effect it will have on your practice, because you'll know exactly what your students have taken in, what they need to go back and revisit, and what you might need to do a recap on. Would you like to discuss anything about 4.2?
No, so it's all about assessment, isn't it? Like whether we are assessing every day or we are doing any assessment kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I can use an example. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not just formal assessments either. It's just about the daily assessments that you do on a normal day, to be honest, as well. Like chatting and observing and, having a quick, session with them or giving them a mini test just before lunch. Those types of things.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. I'll turn this recording off.